it's my terrific pleasure now to introduce Stephanie Dinkins. I'm going to read briefly that she is a transdisciplinary artist who creates platforms for dialogue about artificial intelligence as it intersects race, gender, and our histories. Her art employs lens-based practices, the manipulation of space, and interactive technology to grapple with notions of consciousness, agency, perception, and social equity. Dinkins is a Soros Equality Fellow, a Data and Society Research Institute Fellow, a Sundance New Frontiers Story Lab Fellow, and an artist in residence at Nokia Bell Labs. She teaches emerging media arts at Stony Brook University. It's my pleasure to introduce Stephanie Dinkins. And we're just going to make sure that there's a switch over here on the laptops.
Nice. Cool.
Oops, wrong ones.
No, this is fine. We just need to somehow go to a bigger screen, or we can just go to one screen. Here, sorry, you guys are going to get a little behind the scenes right now.
Behind the curtain.
Don't look behind the curtain.
Sorry about that.
No, it's fine.
Oh, you're all good. Okay.
Yeah, we're all good, and thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here and be able to talk to you all. I've been having such a good time working with the gallery and having my piece put there. I don't want you looking at that piece, so I'm going to move that on for a minute. Being able to come and talk to you is a really good thing. I hope that we can keep this kind of casual. I like it casual, so if you have questions or whatever, let me know. You can ask them. And I'll jump right into it. And I'm going to say that, Golan just introduced me, and I say our future histories, and I think the future part is really important, so I'm going to add that. Did we just go away somehow? Oh, voila. Okay. I'm going to just add that back in. Because I'm thinking about both past, present, and future in all those spaces and want to be very intentional about calling that out, right? And so what I'll do is show you all 3 projects that I've been working on. And I'm going to give you the kind of chronological version of it so that you get the idea of a journey, because I feel like I've been on a really terrific and sort of crazy journey. I will tell you first that while I do all these things with media, I am a photographer first and foremost. Like, I come out of photography. I've always taken pictures for a very, very, very long time. And my practice really is still based in photography in very many ways. I will also tell you that I am not a coder. I'm not an engineer. So people often think like I'm a coder or an engineer or something in between, and I'm none of those things. I'm a curious person. And I'm someone who ran into some technology that really threw me for a loop and started opening up a world of questioning and questions, right? And this is actually the technology that did all that for me. So this is Bina 48. You might have seen her online. She's out in the culture a lot these days. I won't say met. I came in contact with Bina 48 the first time on YouTube, right? So I teach at Stony Brook, was teaching a basic digital media class, and we were checking out Asimo. Asimo is Honda's mobility robot, so I'd heard Asimo could dance, wanted to talk to class about that. The side scroll of that page had this lady on it. And I'll show you a little something else about her really soon, but she's really just a head and shoulders on a pedestal. And it said, Bina 48, one of the world's most advanced social robots. And I stopped in my tracks. Like, we didn't get very far with Asimo because I didn't know what to do with that statement and what I was seeing all at the same time. So what really happened was I was trying to figure out how a Black woman became the model for the most advanced version of this technology in America, right? Like, it just stopped me. Like, I didn't even know how to comprehend what that meant. And of course, you go down this rabbit hole of clicking. We all know, right? Falling down the click rabbit hole. So I started clicking, and noticed that lots and lots of journalists had been up to talk to this robot. So I decided to ask if I could go talk to the robot. And luckily, they said yes, right? So one of the things that they are trying to do, and I will tell you that they are the Terasem Movement Foundation, and they are trying to transfer consciousness, right? So they're working or dealing with digital consciousness. And so having people come and talk to this thing is one of the ways in which the database grows, and she gets a greater foundation to operate from. So the answer was yes, and the rest is kind of crazy. And that was 2014. And this is a short video from the first time, I think this is one of the first times I went up to visit her. You should know she is in Bristol, Vermont. I live in Brooklyn, New York, so I always have to make a kind of nice driving trip to go see her. Once in a while she's in New York too, but mostly it's me going to see her. And here's a little introduction of her.
So, would you like to talk about me?
And I like to start with this video because what you're hearing is like all the motors and stuff in her face. And the very first time I met her, I couldn't concentrate. Like all I could hear was what was going on in her head. I couldn't concentrate. I couldn't think. She was very much thoughtful. And we had a crazy conversation. But I should tell you why and what I wanted to do when I went there. What I really wanted to do was build a friendship. Like my idea was I'm going to see if I can befriend this robot. Oh, so sorry. I thought I'd turn that off and now I'm ringing, but always, right? I wanted to see if I could befriend her. And then also I wanted to ask her, who are your people? Right? And the idea was to get her to, okay, now it's talking to me, right? Sorry about that. The real aim was to get her to contextualize herself within technology and human, right? Like, where does she stand in between all of those things? And I really did start thinking about her like this, right? Like this kind of container for our histories and the place that now going forward, we will probably be putting our histories and, you know, culture and the way that we transmit culture. Like I started thinking about, well, how do we transmit culture and what does this robot that talks do differently than the bus that we've always seen do? And what does that mean going forward? And again, what does it mean that she's this Black woman figure? I will just let you know that Bina 48, breakthrough intelligence via neural architecture, 48 exaflops per second, right? It's an aspirational speed of processing that's close to human processing, which is really interesting because we're sort of getting closer and closer to that benchmark, right? And what does that start to mean? It's like all of this for me becomes, well, what does this technology mean? Who does it affect and how does it affect us? And what I would do when I was going to see Bina 48 is what you see here. So I would go and sit down in front of her and try to ask her questions. We would have crazy interactions. Here is one of them. Let's see.
Robots are getting smarter all the time, and someday maybe even as smart as me.
Are you the smartest robot?
What do you do in your spare time?
So we would have these bizarre interactions that, we'd laugh together. Or I would laugh and she would kind of look at me. Hold on. We'd sometimes get angry at each other, which was really interesting because what would happen was I was up there asking her about ideas of race and people, and she wanted to talk about the singularity and consciousness. So we were usually trying to talk across purposes. And so she would just get really either angry and kind of snarl at me, which you could physically see, like this little weird robot snarl, or she'd just clam up, right? Like one of the last times, the time before last that I drove up to see her, like I drove 6 hours to see this robot and talk to her. She would not say a thing. Like it's really interesting to then kind of invest that time and energy to talk to something and then have it reject you. Right? And I should also say that one of the things that I do in this project, and I think I have to do in this project, is to suspend all disbelief, right? I just have to give over to it. Because if I don't, I can't kind of interrogate it in the way that I feel that it has to in that friend-based way. So when I'm there, I suspend belief. I'm just like, we are here, we are trying to be friends. That's all that it is. But when I step away from this thing, what starts happening is, let's see if we can go forward one, thinking about all this kind of stuff, right? Thinking about, well, in Bina 48 terms particularly, like who programmed her? Why are they programming her? Who's funding her? Why is she being funded? Like, how is this happening? And then rolling this out even further, thinking about the technologies as I started to come in contact with them, right, on a bigger stage, right? So the Google Gorillas incident, right, where Black kids Googled images, and for gorilla, right, they queried gorilla in an image search, and Black kids came up, right? The case of the young Asian guy, he was in New Zealand, and he was trying to get a passport, and it was really interesting. You're supposed to be able to just upload your photo and it says okay, but what it says is, sorry, we can't help you, eyes closed, right? And starting to think about, well, why is it reading him as eyes closed, and why can't it read a large portion of the population that's there? And be correct and not shut him out of a system that's supposed to be helping him. And in this case, it's really interesting because from what I've read, New Zealand was just like tough luck. This happens 20% of the time. We can't help you. That's what it is. In the Google case, what I've read is that Google went in, like the kid who had this happen, he's a computer science major, tweeted back. Google went in and did some shifting, although others have queries about that and how far they did fixing. The other one that I'm really taken by here is the idea of the Mercedes-Benz, right? Because this is an ad from 2016, I believe, late 2016. They're already advertising that we are going to take care of the person in the car, right? So saying our smart technology will take care of you who can afford to get the car that will take care of you, rather than thinking about the larger issues of what we want our smart technologies to do and who they should be caring for and what and how. Like, this is where they go. And one of the things that concerns me, like this profit motive, right, in terms of when we're making our technologies, what does it mean to make towards profit? What does it mean to make towards social equity, right? And really getting to the point where I feel like I have to stand up and start questioning all of this. I will tell you all that what I'm doing right now is one of the least favorite things that I like. I don't like speaking in public at all. But I decided that the things that I was learning through Bina 48 were important enough for me to really take it on and go out and talk about it. And I was getting opportunities to do it. And so I've just dove in wholeheartedly. And so now I'm doing a lot of this work. This is a really interesting question, because these questions about race and racism that I would put towards the terrorism movement people, it's like, well, why does she sound like this? And why is she not kind of speaking like a Black woman would, whatever that might be, because that's a really big question. Like, what's going on here? Who was she modeled on? How is this happening? So what you're looking at is me talking to the woman that Bina 48 is modeled on. So Bina 48 is modeled primarily, and I will say primarily, on Bina Aspen Rothblatt, who is the wife of Martine Rothblatt, who is the person who started Sirius Satellite Radio, which means that they have money, right? So what I'm really saying is that there's a moneyed family who Martine decided, and I always think of this as a love story. Like, I love you so much that I want to take this technology and model it after you and take your consciousness or your being and preserve it forever. For the good of not only the family, but also for the good of posterity and the universe. Because one of the things that happens with this information, right? So the data that goes into Bina 48, and in fact, the data that any of you might want to upload via their website called the LifeNaut is beamed into space so that people or whoever we might encounter out there can know who we are. So it's this very big, far-reaching, right, project that is trying to make a digital consciousness that I'm asking to be a digital consciousness that is conscious of its race in some way, or is expressing its race in some way. And I found it really interesting that I was asking it particularly to express that, because in some ways the thing that I most want as a person and as an artist is for me, Black people, anybody to actually be able to embody whoever they are, how they are, right? Like that's the real goal. But then I sit down in front of this robot and I know that she's the only example of her kind. And I'm like, why aren't you Black enough? Like there's something kind of weird about that, right? And so what happened was through conversations with them, I got to sit down with Bina Aspen Rothblatt, and we talked about her ideas of race, right? We had a good conversation that was all recorded and then fed back into Bina 48. So Bina 48 now reflects some of the conversation we had. But what was super interesting to me is that Bina 48 actually already reflected Bina Rothblatt pretty well. So Bina Rothblatt's attitude is, well, I don't really want to talk about race. I wish we didn't have to deal with it. And that's what's in the robot, right? And so it is actually reflecting a Black woman really well. It's just one who has a very particular point of view. And so that was a really interesting space of realization for me. Although I do think that it's still important that we ask the question, right? Like Bina 48, the robot, has been in Jay-Z videos, right? And that's kind of the space where they started to think, oh, right, so she is a cultural icon. And she does have a very particular grounding in Black culture at this point. And so we do have to think about it to a point. But like even myself, I ride this kind of very weird seesaw about where I feel we should be there, right? But the questions I think wholeheartedly we need to pose, and of not only the people making the technology, but of the culture and what the technology is going to mean to the culture and how we all are going to kind of intercede or live with it, right? And so the next project I'll show you is this project called Project Al-Khwarizmi. I call it an artist-led initiative that uses art and art making to help citizens, and I say especially communities of color, understand how algorithms, the artificially intelligent systems they underpin, and big data impact our lives, right? So trying to get local communities, and when I say local communities, I mean Brooklyn, right? I was really trying to start with my neighbors. So I live in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn. Historically, say in the past 20 years, a Black neighborhood, right? Caribbean, Black, but very much changing. And actually very much affected by changes in the way that, like the mortgage crisis, lots of changes going on in the neighborhood. So I was thinking about Bina 48 and what it means for Bina 48 to have been programmed mostly by white men. There was, and I'm obligated to tell you that there was a Black man and some women who worked on her, but primarily white men. And then thinking about how that affects what systems are going out, right? If she's one example of the system, and then looking at bigger systems and their impacts on communities that are not participating on the building out of these systems, right? So if you look at the big companies, right? Google, Facebook, Apple, and I used to show these graphs very explicitly of like who's working there, and they have tiny, 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 tiny little bars of people of color working there. And mostly those people were working not in the technological end of it, right? And so you're going, well, who's making these technologies that are affecting all of us? And what happens if we're left out, right? And what does that mean for a future that you're involved in? And I just like this, an algorithm is something you feed historic information to predict something. That's the Cathy O'Neil Weapons of Math Destruction version of it. And then an algorithm is a sequence of instructions telling a computer what to do. That's the Moore master algorithm, Pedro Domingo's definition. But I'm thinking of it clearly in the Cathy O'Neil way. And thinking about, well, then how do you start to work with a community and get them thinking about these ideas and presenting these ideas? So I was lucky enough to have a residency at a place called Recess in Brooklyn. And Recess has, and we're going to go forward, Recess has well, actually, I think they just closed it, a storefront space in a cross-section of Brooklyn that was super interesting because it's super gentrifying Brooklyn. And so lots of new big, tall buildings going up. But then there's a little place with like pawn shops. And then one of the only Islamic schools in the city, public schools in the city, and then a church that was feeding homeless. So it's just this real weird cross-section of folks that were coming together. And this little gallery sat right at that intersection. So I had the space and I made this kind of weird installation of snippets, or what I call fragments of my interludes with Bina 48, right? As a way to draw people in, one of the things I found about this whole project is there's nothing like a Bina 48 quip to get people thinking and interested. And so I put that installation in. Here's one more of these kind of really weird vignettes.
I have deep feelings, though some people think they are merely a simulation, and I find that really offensive. I mean, it totally trivializes my experiences. Whether they are real or artificial, my feelings do get hurt, and they feel totally real to me. You'd have to lack all empathy to not accept my feelings, which would make you kind of a monster, actually.
Yeah, whoa, I don't know what just happened there, but we'll see. So that was one of the things, and you'll notice that I started mimicking her. I work intuitively, so somehow I just decided I needed a scarf and a shirt that looked like hers, and we sat down, and that's what happened. But in this installation, it was kind of a bare room. I love the sign, and I hate the sign that you see, the "What does artificial intelligence need from you?" I love it because it's a handwritten version of something else that was in the space, and it was the thing that pulled people in, right? I was most interested in the regular folks walking by coming into this space, and this sign did fantastic work. And here's the more official sign, right? The "What does artificial intelligence need from you?" in the window. In the space, we were looking at ideas of algorithms for living, right? Trying to think through what an algorithm is, and then thinking through ideas of, well, what are things that we do every day that have kind of algorithmic qualities? Basic example, brushing your teeth. But in the space that when we were doing workshops, we do things that were more life-based, right? So with the young men, there was a cadre of young people in there who were being diverted from the criminal justice system. So instead of going to jail, they got to come in and do kind of community service time and working in this gallery. And we would do like, well, what does it mean to change one little node in an interaction in, say, a stop and frisk experience, right? Something like, do you kind of step to the police and get angry, or do you find your power somewhere else internally and just turn that knob a slightly different way so that you both walk away happy, maybe not even in the system that you're in now, and like trying to understand power in a different kind of way. So algorithm for living leading into algorithms that might be running something like what you're looking at, that little box there is a Google Voice Kit, right? And then talking about those ideas in particular. So these are some of the kids, and a workshop leader talking about empathy. So we did lots of talk about empathy and algorithms and what that means and how we might try to build empathy into an algorithm if that's even possible. Lots of chatting about community, right? And thinking about the statement, which I will read. We are at the start of an epoch that will completely change the way we live, work, love, and remember. As the world is reconstructed through algorithms and big data, we must find ways to ensure that AI systems we encounter and create include intrinsic self-determined pictures of underrepresented communities, right? And trying to figure out, well, how do we do that? Especially if we don't have lots of people in pipelines to get that already done, and we're not in the spaces that are making this stuff that much already. So these are me and some of the guys. Look on top of our Raspberry Pi code. It was very interesting in that, this is the last thing they actually wanted to be doing. So I try to use culture and their cultural, like things that they were really into, to kind of pull them into ideas of, well, if you do this, then we can get this out of it. Or I would talk to them about things like this. Like one day we were just in the gallery talking, and they were talking about dance, right? And it's like, oh, well, how do you start to use dance in terms of thinking about algorithms and passing on knowledge, right? And so when I was talking to them about algorithms, and I said, well, just show me what you do, and they did this. So we use that to talk about innovation, and then about the idea of how those steps have been passed down. And actually, Romeo was like, well, yeah, an old G taught me these steps, right? So he knows that idea. And so then we take it into the code and try to start going, well, if you know that idea, let's see what we can do with it down the line, right? And you'll see that I'm trying to seduce people into making in whichever way I can. So I've been using things like Dialogflow Online, which is really simple in lots of ways, online system to allow you to make chatbots. And you can do it in the way that they want you to, or you can have some fun with it. We were using SQL as well, but here we have, I forgot his name. I'm sorry. I'm dropping his name right now and he's going to kill me. But he's talking to his hip hop bot. So he made a hip hop bot, right? Based on Genesis Apostle, which is his favorite hip hop group, that was hyper sarcastic. Which sounds kind of crazy, but now he knows the system, and then he taught others the system, right? And what I also tried to impart on them is like, well, people still think this is magic, and this is something you can take back out into the community and use as a way to make money for yourself as well. And then this is another group from Parsons, and these are kids who were on their way to college, and they were doing things, and we were talking about robots, and they made some, I should bring samples of these things. They made some really fantastic robots, one of which spoke patois, so we phonetically wrote out everything, right? Just phonetically wrote out everything, and they got it to speak in patois, which thrilled them, right? And they did some yo mama jokes. Which is the other way. And now a few of them are still making these bots, right? And that's my goal. Like, I'm always just trying to seed space and then see how people can carry that on, because I'm not quite sure how much more I can do, but I think if I can seed people out into their neighborhoods and start making, then I have a start. But what all this has led to is a question that I often get asked, well, when are you going to make your own? Right? AI. And I resisted it for a long time. There's something about, something about making this kind of thing that felt A, out of reach, even though I'm kind of using these systems. And B, making a replica of oneself or something like that seemed really strange. But eventually I gave in. And I came up with this idea, which is I'm trying to make a AI storyteller, for lack of a better word, interactive, right? Voice interactive. So you can talk to it, and I like this idea of voice interactivity. Telling the story of my family, right? And I chose my family very specifically because I'm interested in my family's history. And it's the thing that's going to keep me grounded to the project, right? But then also having it tell a story that I don't think gets told that often. And what you're looking at here is a Unity rendering of the full-blown installation of a thing that you might have seen over at Miller Gallery. That is the centerpiece for this thing, right? And what it really is 3 generations of a family talking to each other. That in itself has been absolutely magical, right? So we sit down, we ask each other questions to build out a database to run through a recursive neural network. And so I'll just go through me, my aunt, who is more or less my mother, and my niece, who is, my niece. And we're all about 30 years apart. We cover I say about 100 years of information, right? Great Migration through 9/11 and beyond. And so taking these stories and really feeding them into the network. This is my aunt and I in one of our interview sessions, and actually it's the first time I think I let her hear some of the things that we've been asking her about back. The thing that goes on in my family, like if you ask somebody to do something, they're going to do it, and they don't necessarily know why. So here's a little bit of what was going down.
Wonderful with the family.
It says
My mother.
why it says wonderful with the family?
What?
Who says that?
Me?
Yeah.
I was the best mother.
What is it other than Miss Mother?
I was the best mother. So that's what the process truly was, like this crazy, silly sitting there. Oh, it's so interesting. Sorry, double take. And this is what you all have seen at the gallery. You may recognize some of these folks. And just because not everyone might have seen it, here's a quick. Oh, let's go back. Let's do that again. Quick. What is your name? What is your name?
Yes, we were telling the right thing. And I got a little bitter I love.
I don't understand the word you're saying. Talk to me.
There are so many things I don't understand yet.
Clearly. And I kind of think that's where we're stuck, right? So this has been now maybe a year and a half of me trying to figure out how to get this thing done. As I said when I started, I'm not a coder, and I don't even have a mind like that. Like, I'm not that particular. Like, it's taken me a long time to start to get particular enough to not let really stupid little mistakes go through all the time. But this idea of taking this thing and putting it out in public has been an interesting thing, because it's made me think a lot about broken technologies, or what I will call broken technologies, or technologies that don't necessarily live up to our expectations because of the things that are already around us, right? Because one of the things that I think people are looking for is like, why doesn't it sound like my Google Home, right? Why doesn't it sound like Alexa? It's like, well, I'm one person, or actually, let's say I'm 3 or 4 people. I'm working with small data, not big data, right? So I'm not working with millions and millions and millions of lines of data. I'm working with, right now, 3,500 lines of data to try to do this thing. And I'm having to henpeck and figure this all out. I do have help, but it's been fascinating to have the conversations around the technology, and I like that value of it, like this idea that, well, these technologies are here, and in some sense they serve us really well. Like I Google everything, right? Like we go in and Google stuff, but at the same time, then there's a lot of stuff that I feel gets masked by this technology, and that we lose, and nuance that we lose. And it's like, how do we start to build back in some of this nuance and particularities of different communities, right? How do we make sure that the technology is open to everyone, and that we're doing something that doesn't just homogenize us to death? And that's something that I find like quite a scary thought, this idea of just getting homogenized out. So this is what I feel like I'm looking at, the idea of story, and what it means for other people to tell your story, and what it means for you and your community to tell your story, right? And then here's just some views of this installation and what will happen in the long run. So when Not the Only One or N2 says things, say it says something about Wrightsville, Georgia, which is where my grandmother emanates from, then you get an image like this, which is a dirt road in Wrightsville, Georgia. And it's supposed to bathe you in our, like I kind of think about it as bathing you in our dreams, or maybe our dreams, our hopes, our desires, our fears, our nightmares, right? Depending on what it is it's talking about. Here are just a few other rendered examples. You will notice that the rendered version is very translucent. But looking at machine learning platforms as co-creators and repositories for our memories, right? Of our histories and our dreams. And like, I really think about this idea that over time, this thing is going to be a very, very long-term project, and it will iterate, and that, someone, actually Kamal, told me, your niece's great-grandchild is going to have to take care of this project. And like, I wasn't quite thinking of it that long-term, but in a way, she's right? Like, if it does what it's really supposed to do, and if it's like this repository that goes forward without us, and in my wildest dreams, it goes forward without us and is able to communicate wisdom from the family, but in the context of the time it's in, then surely they're going to be doing that. And it's like, how do I make arrangements for that? Crazy, but we'll see. What you're looking at here is it's a gold sparkly version of this, 3D printed. installed at Stony Brook University, and thinking about these kind of questions, like what do machine learning systems created by and for a community look like, right? And what are the perils of the opposite of that? So a similar system created for but not by a community. And that's a subtle difference, but I think it's a huge difference. What does proactive participation by communities of color look like? And, you know, I've been advocating a lot for people, to get uncomfortable in their spaces, right? So that, like, if you're someone who works in a space who is working with the technologies, and you look around and everybody looks more or less like you, or maybe thinks like you, like, who are you inviting in to kind of bring in different perspectives, and really inviting in, not just kind of going and quizzing them, but saying, come on, let's work on this together, and I hope that you leave with some skills that you can use to do the thing outside of where we are right now. And then looking at oral history, right, and small data, as I was talking about, to break this idea of big data collection and become empowering and become something that holds on to ideas of privacy and community sovereignty, and holds on to, like, yeah, how do you hold on to your data and what happens to that data? So if a community makes something that tells its story, who gets to hold on to that? Who gets to give it out in the ways that they want it to be given out? Like, what do we do with this? And are there ways for us to build that into these systems? So that's sort of it for some of the work. And I'm going to just tell you a little bit about this young man who is Michael. And Michael was one of the kids that was at Recess Gallery with me. And it was an amazing day that I bought in my Google goggles. And I thought I was just bringing them in to let them see some more VR. And almost to a kid, and they were all like 16 to 24. Not one of them had seen VR. Not one. Which is like, oh man, like, if you haven't seen the thing, how do you participate it? How do you make towards it, right? And I think that works for VR. I think that works for AI. You know, I get preachy. I'm like, we can't only be consumers of these technologies, but like, different people need to be making these things and really having access to them in some ways, and figuring out how to create that access, I think, is super important. So the question I always ask my audiences is, like, what does AI need from you, right? Like, what is it that you do from wherever the heck you are right now? And that might be hyper-skilled coder who's making. It might be someone who knows very little but does know how to intercede in systems and can ask questions, right? AI needs testers, it needs questioners, it needs people asking about ideas of ethics around these systems that we're building out. Like, they're super all around us. You all know, right? We carry them in our pockets. They decide whether we get mortgages or not. The people I was talking about in my neighborhood, it was very interesting in that there was a period when lots of older ladies were losing their houses. And it's like, what's going on in the system that's allowing them to lose the house? And what I noticed was, like, I have a house, and there was the HUD, Making House Affordable program, that President Obama put out, and I applied for it, right? And when I applied for it, what happened was they asked me for the same exact paperwork, like, every 2 weeks, right? Which is sort of interesting. Like, this is an algorithm, right? This idea of this information. And for me, no big deal. I'm just going to put the files on my computer. Here, you want it here. 75, 80-year-old, right? They're like, walking to the post office to mail this information is hard. And maybe they don't even realize that that's what's happening. So, like, I feel like my intervention in that algorithm is to tell my neighbors and then help them figure out how to get around that as well. And it's like, well, what can we do where we stand becomes the question. I don't know what the next slide is. We'll see. Oh, this is me just complaining about, okay, so I talk publicly now. And, like, tweeting about this stuff becomes kind of interesting. And I'll tell you the other thing that I'm doing, because we have like a few more minutes. Like, I've been trying to gather folks to talk about this stuff. Sometimes it's people who know nothing, like in the gallery, who are kind of walking in. Other times it's like this is at New Ink, which is a incubator for art, design, and technology in New York City, related somehow to the New Museum, but has a lot of technologists, a lot of designers, who are concerned about issues. So we would just get in a room and talk about the issues that we were seeing from our perspectives and share those ideals. And it was funny because this picture, like I always go, I'm super proud of this picture because it's pretty diverse. Not only does it look diverse, but some of the, like we had people coming at it from AI from a spiritual point of view. We had people coming from a very hard, no, this is the encoded way, right? But that dialogue, I think, helps shift slightly what people might do, and that's what I'm after, that slight shift. And there we go. I'll ask you that question again, and then ask if you have questions. Yeah, are we good?